Welcome, everybody. It's Neil Anderson with SkillShark Software, and today we are so honored to have Shawnee Harle, like the motorcycle, who's joining us today as one of our partners. And Shawnee is a two-time Olympian and years of experience as a mental toughness coach for athletes, which is a topic that absolutely resonates with me. Shawnee, welcome, and tell us a little bit about your background.
I love talking about mental toughness because I didn't know about it when I was an athlete. I didn't even know about it when I was an elite coach. You know, as my grandpa used to say, so soon old, so late smart. I think I still have time to get smart, but I'm really passionate about the topic simply because there are tools out there, but most athletes, coaches, and parents are underskilled. Their toolkit is pretty thin. And what I believe is that sport is a series of storms. And most of those storms are emotional. Nerves, worry, self-doubt, lack of confidence, fear, anger, disappointment. The list goes on and on and on. And athletes don't know what to do with the emotional storms. And that's where I come in.
Very, very awesome. Yeah, it's a topic that absolutely resonates with me. Like, there's so many coaches that know how to teach the mechanics of different skills for different sports, but very, very rarely do you see many coaches focus on the mental aspect of not just being an athlete, but also just as a person, because you're going to face conflicts or setbacks in your personal life. So these are all things that can be applied outside of sports. So very, very applicable. So yeah, welcome. So first question I got for you. So what is one of the most common mistakes that you see coaches make when it comes to helping athletes build mental toughness, and how can they correct it?
Oh, I love that.
Right in your wheelhouse.
This is what I see, and I can remember doing this. I mean, I was a coach for 20 years, and so I made all of these same mistakes just because I didn't know how to do it any differently. So when I work with athletes, one of the things that I want to help them be, I want them to be more courageous. I want them to be more willing to take risks. I want them to get outside of their comfort zone. I want them to try hard things. I want them to go to the front of the line, not the back. But there's a reason that they don't. And the reason is, if they do those things, any of those things I just mentioned, and it doesn't work out, they are worried about what happens next. Do I get benched? Do I get yelled at? Do I get punished? Do I get blamed? Do I get criticized? Do I get yelled at? Do I get lectured? So athletes figure this out and they're like, oh, heck no, I'm not going to the front of the line. So they hide to avoid criticism and judgment. So that, I really believe, hinders their ability to be courageous and to practice some mental toughness skills. What do I think the solution is? I think it's, let's do the opposite. I ask coaches when I'm working with them, I said, do you value risk taking? Yes. Do you value creativity? Yes. Do you value independent thinking? Yes. And how do you feel about courage? And they're like, oh, we love courage. I'm like, great. And then I ask this, how do you measure it? Because what matters gets measured.
Yeah.
And the truth is, we don't measure any of these things. And so if we want our athletes to practice mental toughness, particularly courage and risk taking, getting out of their comfort zone, we, coaches, parents too, we have to give them a safe place to land. How come we don't have a stat for courage and teach our athletes, okay, here are 3 ways you can demonstrate courage? Here are 3 ways you could practice taking a risk. Here's how you can get uncomfortable. And then when they do those things, we reward that.
Yeah.
We do the opposite. We punish when they try to be courageous and they fail. We punish the outcome, and that hinders mental toughness.
You know, and the athletes being afraid to be at the front of the line, they're also not just afraid of what the coach might do and might bench them, but also probably more so, how will I look in front of my friends if I don't perform this skill well and I'm the first one to attempt it before getting that opportunity to see everybody else try it and get advice for how to improve. So, yeah. And
you're bang on.
Yeah.
That is F.O.P.O, F-O.P.O, acronym for fear of people's opinions.
Mm-hmm.
From what I've seen in the athletes that I work with, fear of people's opinions is the number one hindrance to athletes showing up as their greatest self. They're afraid of what their coaches think, their parents, their teammates, social media, and even themselves.
Yeah. You know, and this topic that you're an expert on, it's not just the athletes that need to hear this message, but more importantly, the coaches and the parents, like you mentioned a couple minutes ago. They really need to understand that, you know, to make athletes not just a better competitor in the sport that they play, they need to do these kind of things to make them a better person so that they can cope with stresses or setbacks that happen in their personal life. So this is all very applicable stuff. All right. So, and the second question I had for you is, what are some practical strategies that coaches can implement immediately to help athletes who are battling self-doubt or fear of failure during competition?
I think fear of failure is a learned behavior. I don't think we're born with that. You think about a 5-year-old. You give them a coloring book and crayons, and what do? They color everywhere. It's all messy, and they hold it up, and somebody goes, "That is the most beautiful picture I've ever seen." And then they stick it on the fridge.
Yeah.
And somewhere along that line, that same child is given a coloring book and crayons, and they color. And somebody says, "Why did you color outside of the lines? Go redo that." And that picture does not end up on the fridge. So if fear of failure, fear of mistakes, fear of looking bad, if it is a learned behavior, my question is, who's teaching it? But I also believe we are teaching it unconsciously. I don't think we're purposely doing this. I think we just follow the sport culture the way that it has always been, that mistakes need to be pointed out and corrected and punished. And you can say punished in a whole bunch of different ways. Pulling an athlete out of a game when they make a mistake, that's punishment. Criticizing is punishment. So there's a whole bunch of ways that athletes feel like that thing I just did was not okay. So what if we did the opposite? What if we had our own scoreboard? And actually, this is, you know what? I ask this to coaches all the time. What would you focus on in practices if there was no such thing as a scoreboard? If you didn't know when your team competed, if you didn't know who won and lost, what would you focus on in practices? When mistakes were made, what would you say? The scoreboard really gets in the way of a growth mindset.
Yeah.
And so I'll come back to what I said a couple of minutes ago. Can we find our own scoreboard? And coaches, can you detach from the outcome? Can you invest in the process. Can you measure courage? Can you measure risk-taking? Can you measure discomfort? And when those things happen, can those things be celebrated? And then after the fact, if the scoreboard comes into play, how come it can't be used as a growth opportunity, win or lose? The athletes that I work with, most of them say, I'm like, what does your coach say at the end of the game after you lose? And here's what most of them say. Well, I don't know, we just kind of sit there while they lecture us, and I stop listening after about 30 seconds.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, okay. So again, I think we have to get real clear on what are the behaviors that we want from our athletes that demonstrate mental toughness, resilience, grit, bouncing back from mistakes.
Yeah.
And be able to have proof and evidence of those behaviors. And when we see them, reward them. Sport does the opposite. It's based on an outcome called a scoreboard, which is out of our control. And it hinders athlete development for the most part if the coaches don't have the emotional intelligence to know how to manage all of this.
Yeah, and the right training. Yeah, and everything you're saying about measuring, and that's kind of resonates highly with me, because one of the big reasons why we got into SkillShark to begin with was all about allowing coaches and sport programs to be able to provide feedback more easily to athletes than ever before, because any organization using pen and paper, you'll find that they almost never provide concrete feedback. It's all verbal. And as you and I both know, 98% of any verbal feedback from any coach goes in one ear, out the other ear. And when they hop on a mom and dad's minivan, hey, what did coach tell you? I don't know, supposed to just work harder. So on the measurement side, which you mentioned a number of times, something that I offer as advice to any sport program that we set up in SkillShark is set up those self-assessment events for athletes on topics like, how would you rate your team attitude? How would you rate your leadership? How would you rate your work ethic? How would you rate your coachability, your willingness to listen to feedback? And you're not measuring them and imposing a perception on them. It allows them to look inward and say, hey, if coach is asking me this, how do I respond to feedback from coaches? And it gets them to think about that. And your specific strength of mental toughness is absolutely one of those things that, everything that you just mentioned there could be measured in SkillShark, and for programs to
well, what I love about your tool is when I speak with athletes and then I get to talk to their parents after or coaches after, the disconnect is colossal. What athletes think they're doing and how they evaluate themselves compared to how a parent or a coach evaluates them, there's often a really big disconnect. And I think that's one of the best things that your Shark skills can bring. It's like, oh, the athlete thinks this, the coach thinks this. Wow, look at the gap. And now that we know the gap, now we can address that.
Yeah, totally. So SkillShark allows you to send out those self-assessments, and then the coach can see what's going on inside their own athletes' heads. And it's a great way just to find out what's going on inside from the mental aspect of your athletes' noggin. So, perfect. Well, I really appreciate you joining us on the meeting here today, and it was great that we got connected, because your strength absolutely resonates, and it's a message that all parents, coaches, and athletes should get a better understanding of. So, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right. Thanks, Shawnee.